it's for real. And Chris is somebody I've kind of tracked for a while. It turns out he's from Wisconsin. He lived in California, and I'll talk to himself as someone who's been living in this space, knows his technology. He knows what it's like to run a business too. So he can talk about practical. This isn't coming from a computer science engineer perspective. This is coming from a business perspective. So Chris is going to do his thing. And at the end, he's been gracious enough to take some questions. So feel free as he's talking, think about how this can impact your company, your life. What kind of questions you want to answer. And I think he'll answer those at the end of his presentation. So no further ado, Chris, it's all yours.
Thanks, Steve. I really appreciate it. I've been looking forward to talking with everybody here, and primarily for the reason that Steve just mentioned. This is something that's on the headlines basically everywhere, and I think it's really important that that business, not just business owners, but business leaders and decision makers really have a perspective on this and kind of understand what's happening versus maybe what's not. And so I've been looking forward to talking to this audience in particular because I want to sort of maybe demystify this entire language model movement. I'll talk a little bit about how we even got here, but really I just want to talk about like what everybody's talking about in business, how you can make use of this, what are things to think about, what are the things not to worry about, and then a little bit of insight, at least my own perspective, that is on what's next, because we're all in business and we're all here to make decisions and figure out what's coming. And so I have some things that I think might be useful for everybody. And most importantly, I want to tee up the first part of this, about 20 minutes or so, with a presentation just to get a conversation going. And then at the end of that, I will stop the recording and we'll have a private conversation amongst all of us so that we can talk and discuss and throw questions and have all sorts of insightful discussion. Also in the chat right now, since we have a bunch of folks here, I'm posting all of the various links to some of the articles and reference points that I'm going to make here as we move forward in this presentation. And any questions as we go, this is intended to be informal. Please do not hesitate to chime in and ask as I'm moving along. But of course, I'm happy to have this as a formal discussion again off the recording once we get to the end of the presentation. So again, very pleased to be here. And who am I? A little bit of background. So I've spent 25 years building custom business applications for all sorts of businesses, literally hundreds of different businesses over the years. So I'm very familiar with what drives business, how businesses can differentiate themselves. And I was introduced to the concept of machine learning somewhat by accident, frankly. About 10 years ago, I co-authored a paper on using machine learning to predict the outcomes of fantasy football predictions. Yes, that's, for those of you not familiar, Dungeons and Dragons for jocks, but it also is about statistics and trying to predict better than the next person. And as a hobbyist, I collaborated with somebody who's now a colleague of mine here at iSolutionsAI, a data scientist who he and I came up with a series of machine learning models that helped us figure out how to best our friends and family at fantasy sports. Well, fast forward, that ended up becoming very disruptive within fantasy sports. I ended up spending some time working with the NFL for about 3 years, helping them integrate analytics and machine learning into their game platform. And all the while, I was still building business applications for businesses. And it occurred to me, wait, this is a superpower tool. Machine learning in general is a superpower tool for business. And it really changed the way that we do business at iSolutions. And a couple of years back, formally, we moved into iSolutionsAI, which had a concentration on language model integrations for business. And that is, in fact, what I'm going to concentrate on in the discussion here today. Now, specifically, we were all introduced to ChatGPT last November. It's barely over 100 days old. And it has been the single most, the fastest adopted technology of any kind in the history of technology. Specifically, the fastest to 1 million users, the fastest to 100 million users, and it's quickly on its way to becoming the fastest to 200 million by a large margin. So the adoption rate is significant. And what that means is that there's a conversation in the zeitgeist about language models. Now, most of the conversation is focused on ChatGPT, which currently allows a chat-like interface for individuals to be able to talk to OpenAI's GPT models. For some context, OpenAI's models are the same as Microsoft's. They are partners in this endeavor. So when we talk about the language models that Microsoft, for example, has integrated into their entire 365 platform, if you guys saw that announcement a couple weeks ago, those are the same OpenAI models. There are many other organizations, Meta and Google and even Stanford, academic institutions have their own language models. So we're not really just, it's very important to think about this. We're not just talking about one single tool being ChatGPT. As a matter of fact, ChatGPT itself can speak to multiple different models within that interface. So understanding that these are tools, they have specialties, there are things that they can do, and some can do better than others. And it's not just about the version and the speed and the corpus of data. So taking that for granted, and also, why are these language models so important? Well, they're the largest corpus of data that's ever been evaluated in machine learning or AI, and it's brought down to the consumer level. So really, that combined with the adoption rate and the power of what these tools can do has really created this perfect storm and really gotten discussions like the ones we're having here today in the forefront. So my focus is really going to be about business leaders and decision makers. What should they know? What are things they should focus on? And first, I kind of wanted to start with where this discussion comes from. So I've been observing the language model discussion over the last 3+ years, and it has never really been anywhere near as thrust into the forefront as what we're seeing today. And I want to do a little experiment here with what the headlines are saying versus what the what's actually going on with where the investments are happening, what business leaders that are making big time decisions are actually doing. So let's look no further than this Goldman Sachs paper that just came out on March 26th, so just days ago, and they put out a an economics research paper on potentially large effects of artificial intelligence on economic growth. I'm going to get into what the highlights of their findings were in a second. But just to kind of understand where, how sort of, I guess, I don't want to be one of those, well, the media says, but that is exactly what I'm going to focus on here is how is this interpreted? So did people actually read the paper? What does something like this from a very smart institution that people should be following the advice of, well, how does that get interpreted into headlines? Well, if we just do a quick little whip around, we'll see that instantly that becomes AI could replace the equivalent of 300 million jobs. Okay. ChatGPT, which actually that's not necessarily what the paper was talking about, could threaten 300 million jobs around the world. Okay, I think you're seeing the theme here. AI could replace up to 300 million workers around the world. That is what the headline writers actually said. But what did the paper actually say? Well, actually, the paper says that most jobs and industries are only partially exposed to automation and thus are more likely to be complemented rather than substituted by AI. Additionally, worker displacement from automation has historically been offset by creation of new jobs. As a matter of fact, an interesting point that the paper mentions is that 60% of the current workforce today are in occupations that did not even exist in 1940. So a little perspective there. And then they go on to say things like AI could eventually increase the annual global GDP by 7%. That's an enormous claim. Followed also by AI could raise the annual U.S. labor productivity growth by just under 1.5 points over a 10-year period. So what I'm trying to show is the sort of the juxtaposition between what the public discussion is on AI versus what individuals who are really dialed into this are thinking. Another thing I'd like to point out to kind of show that is there was a survey last year, a 2022 survey, the IPSOS survey specifically was polling public opinion in various countries on the question of whether or not they felt positively about AI products and services. And right at the top of the list at about 75 or 78% or 71% to 78% are India and China, you see at the top of that list. And in the United States, only 35%. So that's what the public opinion is on AI and machine learning, but look where the money is actually going. So the actual investment, and this came from the Stanford report that was just released, the actual investment in from VCs The US actually led the world with the total amount of AI private investment. That's 47.4 billion. That's 3.5 times the amount of China. So those with the money and those with the decision-making power are moving in the direction of AI, even despite the fact that the public opinion is pretty significantly not in favor of that. Also, the US continues to lead in terms of the total number of newly funded AI companies, which is very close to that 3.5. It's a 3.4 times more than China. So even though public opinion in China is about AI is very positive, in America, it's not, but the money in the United States is going strongly in favor of AI. And let's look at a couple of folks who, you don't have to listen to me. You can let's talk about a couple of folks that kind of know what they're talking about. So if you believe in these individuals, these are some of the statements, which I think are rather grandiose, but deserve listening to. But Bill Gates recently in his blog post, The Age of AI Has Begun, made the statement that the development of AI is as fundamental as the creation of the microprocessor. He mentioned the personal computer, even the internet and the mobile phone. And we're actually starting to see that from adoption rates and VC funding and where the tech is going. The CEO of Google said AI is one of the most important things humanity is working on, even more so than electricity or fire. And finally, Lawrence Summers, former US Secretary of the Treasury, went on to say that AI is the most important general purpose technology since the wheel or fire. These are pretty strong statements, and they're from individuals that really, I believe, seem to know what they're talking about. So just some thoughts to, to help you make your own opinion on these.
When I went to graduate school.
Oh, actually, I'm sorry. Actually, I have a quote from him if you want to listen to that here. Let me see if I can get the volume on this one.
Look, when I went to graduate school, we used to
Sorry about
models with 5 parameters. Now they're going to be 175 billion parameters.
Sorry, getting there. Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry about the audio.
Parameters that go into one of these systems. The great computer scientist Alan Turing, 70 years ago, said that it was going to be a threshold for humanity when a machine could imitate a human being's answers to questions in a way where another human being wouldn't be able to tell the difference. We're somewhere in the territory of that right now, and that is a profound thing for humanity. It points to a profound change in the way we're all going to be working. We're all going to have a kind of caddy that, or many of us are going to have a kind of caddy that is going to augment our creativity, augment our capacities to bring knowledge to bear on what we do, augment our accuracy. But just as the printing press or electricity was a huge change because it was a general purpose technology, this could be the most important general purpose technology since the wheel or fire.
Sorry about the audio there, but in general, he worked his way up to the quote I shared with you by pointing out comments from Alan Turing and how we're essentially there and focusing on how every one of us will have our own caddy, as he called it, or personal assistant based on this. Certainly, this is, being the former Secretary of Treasury, he does have some vision on how technology can impact our economy. So now I want to just kind of move a little bit into, and this is all be food for thought on our discussion later. What, from my perspective, are things that business leaders should be focusing on? So, first of all, I coming from understanding these language models and what they're capable of, just from the pure tech, I think it's important to point out the tech is where it needs to be already. There's no, ChatGPT or GPT-4, which is something you can experience through ChatGPT for free, but also through APIs, which is how business integrations happen, wasn't even really necessary. There was nothing that we needed there for businesses to jump on this. But what it introduced, the level of reasoning that it introduced was absolutely incredible. And that becomes a reasoning tool that can be leveraged by businesses. But we were ready to integrate into businesses and make huge, amazing strides before that version of even just the GPT model came out. And almost every week, new models are being released that have different specialties and different strengths. So there, from a tech perspective, there simply isn't anything to be waiting for. That's the first note that I wanted to throw out there. As a matter of fact, there are a lot of organizations are not waiting. As a matter of fact, in the AI by McKinsey report, the proportion of companies adopting AI in 2022 is more than doubled since 2017. Now, the 2017 is significant because that's when the attention is all you need paper from Google Brain came out, which introduced the concept of transformers. And that is what this technology is all about. It's about transformer architecture. That is the new thing that's come out. So since then, the proportion of companies adopting AI in general, because AI existed before language models certainly, has doubled. And per this report, organizations that have adopted AI report that they're realizing meaningful cost decreases and revenue increases. So these are organizations that are doing it at breakneck speed, adopting at breakneck speed, and they're seeing exactly the type of gains that they hope for in these investments. This is probably, so for those of you that are, for all of you business leaders and decision makers, this is what I'm here to report to you from deep into the bowels of the AI community. This, I think, is kind of more of an alert than any of the, oh, my browser became sentient and tried to get my wife to leave me or whatever articles that you're reading. This one's real. It is simply just supply and demand. The AI talent pool is extremely, extremely shallow right now. Even this headline that you're seeing here doesn't do it enough justice. As a matter of fact, you can look at the Stanford Artificial Intelligence Index report that literally just came out, has a couple of stats on this. The number of AI-related job postings has increased on average from 1.7% in 2021 to 1.9% in 2022. It does not seem big, but that is a lot of need for AI jobs. Employers in the United States alone are increasingly looking for workers with AI-related skills. Here's the problem. Here's what I'm reporting to you from behind the curtain. Their schools are not teaching language model skill sets. There are not an influx of graduates that are coming out with the specific skills like prompt engineering and how to integrate language models or agents and tools. And the reason for that is because most of the things I just explained, that I just mentioned to you, didn't even exist 6 months ago. Some of the ways that businesses are actually integrated and leveraging these models are currently being invented as we speak. Like the bridge is being created as the cars are running over it. And what that means from a supply and demand standpoint, and I can tell you as someone who hires and team builds and actually encourages my clients to create AI expertise internally, is that the well is essentially dry. As a matter of fact, as an employer myself, one of the tactics that I've turned to is I am going to be teaching a prompt engineering course for those that aren't experienced in Silicon Valley coming this spring. And I'm doing it as a way for me to be able to onboard new talent. And the really, really impressive talent are being gobbled up left and right. There just is not enough of this talent out there. And this just doesn't go for hires. This also goes for consultants. I don't mind telling you as a consultant that, we'll talk to somebody, 1 week or something along those lines. And a couple of weeks later, we can't even do the job anymore because just, the amount of resources out there where there's just not enough. The demand is absolutely going crazy. So, what I would point out that is that this happened before as well in the Industrial Revolution. The only thing that stopped the Industrial Revolution was just lack of skilled labor. This became a major, major problem, especially in the UK, where the government intervened and started training programs and educational programs, some of which we still see today. The construct of these things we still see today were really just emergency responses to the lack of the talent. So in this case, technology is evolving rapidly, but business leaders, if you take nothing away from this presentation, if you have talent internally, if you're aware of talent, if you have relationships with consultants that can provide these services to you, lock them down. It is probably the number one thing, because by the time the majority of businesses awaken to this, they're just not going to have the tools and the resources at their disposal to be able to take action. So right now, there are people out there, there are individuals who can be hired, there are agencies that can be onboarded. I strongly recommend taking action on that. It's probably today's biggest message. Also, as business leaders, we all know that there's a lot of discussion. I'm not going to for some reason, this has become a very political topic, so I'm not going to necessarily take a stance, but there's a great deal of discussion and metrics and indicators that say that we might have an economic downturn or correction coming. And so what that means, and we've seen that in the form of, layoffs all over the place. And let me pause for a moment. First, Michelle, I want to give you a chance to ask your question. Please go ahead.
Yeah, quick question. So when you say AI talent, like what is the skill set that you're hiring for? Is it generally like someone because we hire AI folks today, but they come with very different skill sets. What do you see as that sweet spot? Like, is it someone good at puzzles? Is it an engineer? Is it someone with ability to look at patterns and behaviors? Where would you go with this?
First of all, brilliant approach to that, Michelle, because that's where the answer comes from. When you look at, and probably some of the hiring that you're doing already is probably focused on like ML ops and actual modeling and data science. Those are all important skill sets when it comes to creation of models. And when it comes to integrating models, the skill sets, really what they're called today, and this is going to seem kind of novel, but this will be something that'll be firmly in the zeitgeist by the end of the year. We're looking for prompt engineers. And so I enjoy being able to answer the question of what type of skill set does that look like? Believe it or not, prompt engineering is the first time in technology where coding, very sophisticated technology, does not have anything to do with code. It actually has to do with language. As a matter of fact, I've seen some of the prerequisites that we were to kind of shed some light on this conversation. I mentioned I'm teaching a prompt engineering course, and the university that I'm working with, we decided what are some of the prerequisites. Well, we started off by talking, do they need to know Python or even JavaScript for integration purposes, or what type of machine learning background should they have? And ultimately, we threw all that out, and what we landed on was we're just as interested as taking individuals who have language education and skill set or journalism skill sets. I can say even anecdotally that one of the fastest trajectories that I've seen personally within my inner circle is someone who's a Berkeley grad in journalism and had no technical expertise at all. And she just went in the last 6 months from a temp job all the way up into a leadership position within her organization because of her grasp of language models. So the other observation that I will tell you is that deep into my cave of trying to understand how to teach these concepts to people, it occurred to me that there is a playbook that already exists. And my wife happens to be an elementary school teacher. And that night, I mentioned to her, hey, can I ask you a couple questions about just what they're teaching kids in school in English? And after about an hour or so, we realized that the actual playbook for prompt engineering, really at the highest level, even at this point, comes just as much from the elementary school English textbooks as it does from any technology university. So it has to do with sentence structure and tone and pragmatics and concepts like that. And if those make sense to people, they're going to be on a faster track than even those that are bringing like highly technical machine learning capabilities into the job role. So if you want to sort of be creative with it and kind of skate to where the puck's going on some of these things, I would focus just as much on language understanding as I would on any technologies. And actually, you mentioned some really good examples before, Michelle, with like puzzles and problem solving. And really, when you break down what the experience of successful prompt engineering is, it's not what's referred to as like single shot, where you just ask it a question and then everything you need comes back. It's very much about having a conversation, so that the idea of pragmatics and rules of conversation, any kind of skills that you think you can suss out that focus on those types of things are gonna find a lot of success and acceleration when it comes to the actual prompt engineering role, which is essentially, besides that and API integrations, that is what where the creativeness comes into play when you're integrating with language models. Excellent question. I appreciate that, Michelle. And then to address the current economic conditions, pick whatever indicators you want, whether you're conservative, whether you're bearish or bullish on this. Certainly, business leaders sort of en masse are thinking about how to do more with less. I can tell you that while I have some sort of maybe concerns, as a human being about some of these things, some of our most successful deployments right now are within enterprises that have recently had to do a lot of layoffs and have to figure out how to still be productive in the absence of that human layer. And so this will likely continue. I certainly hope that it doesn't. I'm a business owner myself, and I'm rooting for my company and all my clients. But if it in fact continues to decline, that means that companies will have less budget and still be required to do more. And that is the absolute perfect opportunity for AI integrations when it comes to efficiency. I thought really hard about what would be the suggestions of what I would suggest to all business owners now. And I wrote a post about this on LinkedIn that I shared in the chat. And I thought, well, what would the first thing I would say to a business owner be? I would say have a drop everything meeting next Monday. Get everybody in your organization into a room and literally just talk to them about AI. Just simply ask them, what experiences do you have? What perspective do you have? And essentially what you're doing is you're going to take inventory on your existing team's skills when it comes to AI. We might have one of those potential prompt engineers already assigned to doing something else. They could be anywhere, frankly. They could be in your accounting group or wherever it is. But for you as a business leader to understand what potential resources you currently have at your disposal is really important. And also just to understand culturally, what are people doing with it? Hey, if the answer is I've written a couple of poems about my pets using ChatGPT, perfect, that's great. At least you've broken through that barrier and you understand what this is like. But if you have somebody that's really doing some sophisticated stuff, or you find out you have some individuals that are, doing like what Steve does and obsessing on AI all night long and, in and outside of his work duties, those are people that you probably want to pull forward and have conversations with and get to know a little bit. Plus, there might be people that are using AI already, these language model AIs, to do work tasks, and those are probably things that should be on your radar. So it's very important to understand culturally where your organization may already be, and then also what kind of talent that you currently have within your team. The other part is, I would say, just because I, sort of get the perspective of seeing not only my own organization, but into, the boardrooms of my clients, if you are so privileged to see what your competitors are doing with AI, I would make note of that, because whether they're being successful or not, these are experiments that are going to be useful to you in the acceleration of your adoption of these technologies. And I would probably also say, if you don't hear about any of your competitors using AI, then it's probably healthy to assume that in fact they are using it. And that is something that you should be aware of. Table stakes at this point, meaning just simply the very least you can do is look to do things like maybe upgrade some of the software that you've seen if you guys are already subscribers of Microsoft's 365 platform, or even Google's. They've both introduced, actually pretty much every platform out there has some sort of AI component to it. But the most impressive one out there is certainly Microsoft's 365 Copilot, which is really, it seems like it's upgrades to every application in their business suite of products, but in fact, it's really one thing. They managed to pull in, have a way to centralize into a single source of truth all your company's data that they have access to, at least. That is something that's going to come up here in a couple of slides. And they're allowing you the ability to organize that, or have a sort of a corporate intelligence, and then they provided these chats and text to build and all sorts of inquiries built into their platform that are really going to help accelerate all of your workers at a desktop standpoint, whether it be helping you write an email or create a slide deck. At the very least, this is productivity. These are productivity gains that are just sitting there waiting for you with very minimal investment. I would also say, and this is really where my perspective comes from, take inventory of your data, specifically because it's not all about communicating directly with language models. In fact, it's about creating a layer of your data between your users and language models, and then just simply really kind of minimizing the role of the language models to providing superpowers of reasoning or being able to talk and write like human beings can in a way that's easier for them to understand than maybe just doing queries against data. So whatever data you have now, data that you have active relationships with, that's really important. You have to really kind of think from a first principle standpoint, what is the relationship you have with that data? I would also, though, say if you can find maybe some dead data, that's a term that I've just maybe in a somewhat morbid fashion been using when I talk to my clients about, do you have documents that are just sitting in repositories that you haven't even looked at or done anything with that you know probably contain important information, whether it's personal documents or corporate documents, whatever they are. There are absolute low-hanging fruit tools out there that allow you to convert those or vectorize documents into chattable and interactive data stores using one of the other sort of tertiary things that's kind of come to the forefront is semantic search over index search. Just being able to take advantage of that with documents that maybe you didn't have access to before is going to dramatically increase your corporate IQ. And that could be information that's just literally, not literally, but figuratively sitting there gathering dust within your organization. And so to kind of finish off this presentation, and then we'll jump into a conversation. I look forward to hearing everybody's thoughts. I want to kind of talk about, at least from my perspective and maybe some other people's, what is next. So if organizations are doing nothing with AI, there's no question that you are behind, at least on the conversations. And so I'll get in, some of the things that are table stakes are chatting against your data, asking questions of data. That's, as they are commonly saying in the AI world, so 2 weeks ago, which there's dog years and then there's AI years, and just a couple of weeks ago is critically far behind with the advancements. Some of the stuff that's coming next, I'll share with you some of my thoughts here in a second, but I don't know if you guys are familiar with Social Capital or Chamath from Social Capital. I've become aware of him through a podcast that it's probably one of the most popular podcasts out there. It's a great listen of all matters of whether investment or tech, and they've done a lot of really insightful focusing on AI, and it's called the All In Podcast. I strongly recommend it. I'm not the only one listening to it. It's extremely popular. I think all business leaders should be putting that one in their ears. But Chamath has a voice about what he thinks is next from AI, and I'm going to share a little of it here because it sort of frames up what I agree with him. I think this is where things are going. So if you can kind of skate to where that puck's going, that might be helpful. So here's Chamath's opinion with hopefully a little bit better audio. Let's see what he says.
He told me this yesterday, which I loved. He told this story about refrigeration, and the story he tells is that the people and the person that invented refrigeration made some money, but most of the money was made by Coca-Cola, who used refrigeration to build an empire. And I view these large language models as refrigeration. Will there be some money made in it? I think so. But the Coca-Cola has yet to be built. And those are the companies that are really going to monetize it. And in order to monetize it well, here's a basic thing about machine learning that's worth knowing, which is if you take 1,000 of the same inputs and give it to Facebook and Microsoft and Google and Amazon, they'll all come up with the same machine learning model. But if you have one extra thing, one little ingredient that all of those other companies don't have, your output can be markedly different. It's like giving 2 great chefs 3 ingredients, but you give the 3rd chef 1 extra one. That person has the ability to do something very special.
So
he told me this.
That's his perspective from a VC standpoint, and essentially what he's articulating there, because I've heard his opinions on this, is he is saying that the next big gold rush or oil rush that we'll see within this AI's emergence is going to come from proprietary data. Now, maybe we're not VCs throwing millions of dollars around and where the next big investment opportunity might be, but how do we actually bring that down to business decision-making levels? And to me, it is abundantly clear with zero ambiguity from my end that your proprietary data within your organization layered like I mentioned before, in between your users and these language model capabilities is really where everybody should be focusing. We're already seeing this in things that are what I refer to as table stakes, asking data, asking over documents. But we're already starting to see, like with what Microsoft did with bringing all of the corporate intelligence together into a single source of truth. This is very much what organizations of all sizes can take advantage of, consolidating their data, resurrecting dead data that they might not have relationships with, and then having that data provide intuition. Because one of the most amazing things that these language models do, and they do this consistently, is provide intuition and levels of intuition that are frankly just astonishing. So I'm not talking about, is its research truthful? I'm not talking about, does it do math well, or, does it get the right information about certain public figures correct? None of that matters. What I'm talking about is using this as superpowers for reasoning, superpowers for translating your data strategically into ways that human beings simply cannot do. And that is all at the fingertips of every business owner out there, regardless of size. To give you an idea of what it costs to, just from having an API pipeline to OpenAI, my organization, we use it from a development standpoint. We integrate our own systems internally. And frankly, I've never had an invoice from OpenAI that's more than $200 a month. So when it comes to actually just paying for the commodity, this is, and actually just keeps getting cheaper. When their 3.5 turbo, the ChatGPT API came out, they actually decreased the cost of the API calls by 90%. So the power is going up and the cost is going down. So certainly, integrating these APIs and understanding your business flow, that takes some professional help. That, of course, is probably the biggest issue is locking down talent, finding the right talent to develop internally, finding, third-party, vendors and consultant help to integrate that. But the actual ongoing day-to-day cost of this, we're not talking about millions of dollars. We're literally talking about hundreds of dollars for organizations to be able to invest in. So I think that's really important. And all of this leads to what I'm seeing emerging in sort of the horizon of AI, which is organizational intelligence, just a different way of looking at your data as a whole, a different way of understanding what the workers that you have available to you in your human layer within your organization, how they can express themselves and how they can get jobs done and what roles they play versus the organizations themselves. So these are a bit of where, just from my perspective, where I see some things going, and I look forward to chatting with you all about it. In addition, before I open up the Q&A to the more general discussion, a couple of the links I put in there are just some papers that I wrote about some of these topics. If you're interested in double clicking a bit on these, the disrupting business applications is my opinion on where businesses' relationships with their data are going. And then also I have one called the AI Playbook, Trusting Language Models for Business, which I address a lot of the concerns that you hear out there: accuracy, the relevance gap, math, safety, moderation, all of that. I'm going right at it, and I'm telling you what the tools are and the techniques are there to do this safely and intelligently within your own organizations. So with that, I'm going to stop the